People love beer. It's cheap, easy to find, not too strong. It's great for years of nights out with your friends. All you need to do is keep it cold. Some people love beer so much that they're willing to pay more for premium and imported brands. And then there is craft beer. Around the world, some beer lovers have long made their own beer to their own taste and shared it with people who want something really different. Imported craft beer came to the Philippines about 10 years ago, helping inspire a growing list of local craft brewers. One of the first were four friends behind Katipunan Brewery, two of whom are with us today, Rafi Taruk and Kio Mura. Rafi, Kio, thank you very much for coming to Rappler.
Thank you for having us.
So you have this, a lot of craft beers have these funny or even in-your-face names. I think it contributes to their individuality. Yours is Katipunan, great name. But where it came from is not exactly as revolutionary as one might think, right?
Yeah, when people see our name, automatically they associate it with being revolutionary or starting an uprising, like that. When in truth, when we came up with it, we just wanted something.
And it's red,
yeah.
And you have a revolutionary figure in the background as well.
Yeah.
But
the story behind it is really when we were trying to think up of a name, we just wanted something that would be close to us, something very relatable, something we can associate with. Since all four of us were actually high school classmates, so we grew up together, studied in Ateneo. So Katipunan is something, it's a place that's very familiar.
Katipunan Avenue.
Yes. So Kio lives there, I live there, and even as we went, all four of us, we went our separate ways in college. Two of us went to UP, two of us went to Ateneo. We're still in the vicinity of Katipunan, and that's where we still meet up to have a beer.
Does the misimpression about the name help though?
I think it's a happy coincidence that there's a revolutionary connotation, especially if you consider that most of the large macro breweries in Asia were started up by colonists. And so I think it fit that this is our own little way of chipping away at that.
In fact, your main beer, your main line is called Indio.
Yes.
So it fits the whole character.
Yes.
So you talked about being high school buddies. You kept in touch, stayed friends through college, went your separate ways. At some point, you started to think about going into business together. The first one was not about beer, was it?
No. There's like long conversations trying to brainstorm of what business to come up with.
And for sure, these conversations happened over beer. Some of them.
Some of them.
Most of the time.
But it didn't hit you that was going to be the business yet. What is?
I think the first thing we tried and got pretty serious about was a photocopying business, which was supposed to be a free photocopying funded by ads, which were the back of the pages. And initially we thought it was a great idea, but it fizzled out pretty quickly. And over a night of drinking, became obvious that drinking was what kept us together.
Maybe the photocopying business, the free photocopying business, was just ahead of its time.
Maybe.
Maybe.
And so when you were sulking over that disappointment, how did you come to the idea that beer would be the business?
Well, I guess for all four of us, beer was something we were all very much interested in. As much as drinking it, but also discovering new kinds of beer. Whenever we'd travel, we'd share the beers we drank, new ones we've tried, which eventually led us to discovering about craft beer. And as we learned more abroad,
yeah.
And we discovered craft beer abroad, came back here, we found that it's available, so was importing craft beer. And so our curiosity just grew from there. Eventually, we led us to a path where we discovered that most of these craft breweries started out home brewing, so brewing their own beer at home. And it just, I bought a book. we tried brewing in my kitchen, very small. The first batch we did, I think we made like 9 or 10 bottles. And we just kept going from there.
You mentioned somebody was importing beer, and there was a community of brewers already here. How important was that, or what role did that play in your deciding to put up a business?
Well, when we first started to read about home brewing, it was something very daunting, to be honest, because if reading the literature, it's all very tailor-made for like the Western climate, and especially the ingredients or the equipment. There's no shops here you can just walk into and then buy ingredients or buy the necessary equipment that you need. That isn't. We haven't even started brewing yet. So when you get to the brewing, if something goes wrong or something happens that you don't know how to solve, it's all, you're probably stuck or you have to just wing it. So it really helped that as we were starting out, we also discovered that there's a small group of people here who are also trying to homebrew or who've been homebrewing for a while. So
Just for themselves and their friends.
Yes.
They weren't necessarily going commercial.
No.
Not yet, no. So I think it was very important that the whole movement started with this homebrew group, because I guess made sure that the pioneers were just a bunch of nerds who like beer, and the main focus of brewing was just to make good beer, and without the end goal of selling it, we just liked beer a lot.
And you mentioned the importer. What role did he play?
Well, of course, by bringing in craft beer,
That's
Jim,
Jim,
at
yeah.
Global Beer Exchange. So he's been bringing, like you mentioned, about for almost 10 years now, and that's really, I think, he really took the first steps in opening the doors to awareness of craft beer, not only for the market but also for us. I'm sure all those people who started homebrewing wouldn't have learned about it or tried it if they hadn't had their taste of craft beer.
So we really got an education at Jim's shops and pubs. I remember one of the first bitter beers I had was called Arrogant Bastard, aptly named, and the copy on the back just said that you're probably not good enough for this beer. You probably can't handle it. You're not man enough. And due to that, I sent the beer back. I said it was too bitter. Then a year later, we ended up starting to like bitter beers. Our taste buds weren't attuned to it yet, but yeah.
So you said that you learned this just by buying a book, probably going on YouTube
Yeah.
a bit. You've taken responsibility for the brewing side. You're more on the sales side right now, right? What were the first attempts at brewing like for you, for all of you?
First of all, I think one of the biggest barriers starting out is it was basically a non-existent industry, so there were no suppliers to speak of. In terms of equipment or raw materials, we couldn't just waltz into a grocery store and get materials we needed. They just weren't here at all. So we had to
Improvise, a lot of DIY, a lot of researching on YouTube on how to do this, how to make this, how to build that.
So I saw your first, do you call them vats?
Or pot.
I saw your first vats or pots in your plant, and they were soup pots,
Yep.
stock pots, right?
Yep.
Huge stock pots. You just got that off a kitchen store, I
Yep,
guess.
Yes.
exactly. And then we just drilled holes and put fittings on it, so the faucets and spigots, so liquid can transfer from one pot to the other.
So you started out in your kitchen.
Yeah, we started out in my kitchen brewing really small batches. Like I said, it was 9 or 10 bottles. It was really just, it wasn't even a big soup pot. It's just the regular pot you have at home, an induction burner, all that. Eventually, after that first taste of home brewing, we moved to Kiosk Garage, where we had bigger, again, our idea of scaling up is just buying bigger pots and a better burner. And then from there, we just kept brewing, kept making different kinds of beer, having our friends try it. Eventually, again, buying a bigger pot, moving to a different location, this time in the office building of one of our other partners, until we get to having the largest setup we have now.
Where you are now. You've been there for a few years now.
Yeah.
You've taken charge more or less of sales. What were the first sales like? How difficult were they?
It was pretty difficult walking into an establishment and selling something they had they knew nothing about.
And you don't have a sales or marketing background.
No,
What was your major?
my undergrad was econ. Then I went on to law school, which I left about little over halfway through
For
to
this?
pursue this. I think that's the press release of a lot of interviews that I heeded the siren's call of brewing, but just a coincidence that it happened around the same time.
So what were the first sales like?
It's really tough. For the first times, our first flagship beer is a pale ale, and
That's Indio.
yes, the Indio Pale Ale, which is just the quintessential craft beer style. I think the balance of bitter and sweet. But the question we would always get is, what type of beer is it like if you would compare it to one available locally? And is it like a Pilsen? Is it the same? And
It's like a dark beer, but it's not.
it's not. And without having them try it, it's always hard to explain and to sell it, why they would need it and why it was
So
so
you'd
much
make
more
them try
expensive.
it.
Yes, we would. We would give samples, and the next hurdle would be the price point, because at the time it was already about 4 or 5 times the price of
A
local lager.
beer.
Yeah.
Do you remember who your first sale was to?
Yeah.
I think the very first time we sold the beer was at like a 4th of July party at one of the restaurants here in Pasig. And then we just invited a lot of friends. We told the owner of the bar was a friend also, so he welcomed us, our beer there. So I think we just brought 2 cases. And most of it actually was consumed by friends, bought by friends, which we were very thankful for. Except for one bottle, which we saw like some stranger, a person we didn't know, happened to see it on the bar. I guess the branding or just seeing something new made him curious about it, picked it up and bought it. We count that as our first sale.
How big of a high was that?
We were super giddy.
On one bottle.
That one bottle. Our partner Brett Lim, I think he stalked that guy for the rest of the night, trying to
see if he had any
eavesdrop.
feedback.
Did he?
I don't remember.
I don't know either.
So your 2 other partners are Brett Lim and Miguel Buling. And Miguel is in charge of finance.
Yes.
And when you guys were starting to decide that you'd be serious about this business, you told me what he told you.
We had a little pep talk because we were writing down our mission, vision, and our goals. And I think he put it pretty bluntly, like, guys, hindi tayo yayaman dito. For sure, you still want to do this. And I think we very quickly answered yes. It was all
Easy
very
decision to make.
like, let's make beer. It was all very exciting, and we still feel that way.
Why do you think making beer is worth probably not making a lot of money?
I don't know, when you walk into a room, you feel like you have the coolest job in the world among everyone there. But it's just fun. We always say that first and foremost, we're beer lovers. So if we'll make beer that we love, and if nobody else likes it, we'll drink it.
We feel very strongly about the product. So we walk into a restaurant and we see someone drinking a beer, not even our beer, but someone pairing it with their dinner. We love seeing that. We always advocate pairing beers, and we always argue with rivals wine and pairability and complexity. I really believe that. Medyo biased, but I think it's true.
You talked about this being the coolest job. You don't do much of this anymore because your vats are bigger, but you used to do one-offs, very small batches. Do you miss that?
Yeah, we do. Lets us experiment. Feel like mad scientists sometimes. Come up with unusual flavors or different beer styles that normally we wouldn't do. But again, like you said, having producing more volumes is much harder to do those one-offs since it'll be much harder to sell, at least in large quantities.
When your partner Miguel told you that you probably wouldn't make a lot of money doing this, those were still heady days when you were one of the few players around. You're certainly one of the first players there. Why, even at that point, was it clear to him and to you that this would not be a huge moneymaker, that the market was limited?
Obviously, it's a very niche market. It's on cost alone. I think that's one of the biggest barriers for people to try it. Compared to like a regular beer, commercial beer, Keo mentioned it's 4 or 5 times. Some people even say it's a luxury, an affordable luxury, but a luxury nonetheless. So it's really one of the biggest challenges. Really is getting more and more people to try it and to make it a regular thing.
How big is this, the price issue? How big a challenge is that for you?
Well, sometimes we'll walk into a restaurant. Of course, we look through their menu, and sometimes I'll notice the beer is about the price of a meal, or over half. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of a diner who's never had craft beer, and they're having a steak dinner, and it's almost half the price of that, I'd be wary. There's a big barrier to trying it. But we found, especially early on, once some people got to try it and see how different it really is, that it's worth the money sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And you really have to, the places who do carry it and who are open to it, they really try to push it, and they understand what the product is and how it pairs well with their menu.
You've told me that the last 1 or 2 years have been more difficult. There are a lot more players now. How do you think this is all going to develop?
We're being optimistic, of course, that the more players there are, the greater the reach. If you look at it that way, I think what the craft beer industry really needs is more exposure, wider reach, a wider audience. Right now, as I mentioned, it's very niche market, and we feel that that niche market is starting to, what's the term? Saturate.
Overcrowded.
It's becoming overcrowded. So you really have to branch out more and try to get more people to try it. And hopefully, since there are more producers, the net becomes wider.
One of you told me that, or you both told me, that the limit is kind of geographic. When you look at Metro Manila, where you're based, you can't even sell all over Metro Manila. You're just fighting over 1 or 2 places, right? What are those 2?
Well, I guess highest concentrations would be in BGC, in Bonifacio, and in Makati CBD. So these are where all the upscale restaurants are, the new hip bars are located, and only natural that all of the brewers would want their beer stocked there.
Because there are other places in Metro Manila that are hip, but maybe don't have the spending power to buy beer at 3 or 4 times, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we've just recently started selling more in around QC, Pasig, but historically, over the past few years, it's always been Makati and BGC. But our goal, of course, is to make it more accessible to other parts of Metro Manila.
Let me ask you, what's next for a brewer like you? Is it just expansion, or are there other plans?
Well, I think a natural next step would be opening your own bar, probably.
Some of your
contemporaries.
contemporaries have done a similar strategy.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's an easy outlet. I mean, if the problem is trying to find a place to sell your beer, there you go. You just open your own place, right? It's something we've thought about even at the start. When you're thinking about the beer business, are we going to do just a brewery? Are we going to do a brew pub, which is a restaurant and a brewery? And then we thought, we don't know how to do a brewery. none of us have an experience in starting a restaurant. So rather than do two things that we don't know, let's just stick to one.
But I think that's a pretty smart move. If you do it right, if you know what you're doing with your bar, any profits you generate there can cover overhead for the brewery, so you don't have to worry about that. So all you do is just brew and brew.
And you can do your one-offs as much as you want since you have an easy outlet to sell
Just
to.
push it whenever you want.
It's one thing if there's a shakeout and some of the players fall by the wayside. It's quite another thing if this becomes a passing fad or fancy. You're confident that's not the case. Why is that?
If you look at the other countries, not just in the West, which has a very mature craft beer market already, they've been at it for almost 30 years, maybe even longer. But even within the region where craft beer started a little earlier than us, it's still there, and more breweries are popping up in those other countries. More bars that are carrying exclusively craft beer are popping up also, which is the same. It's what's happening here. So it feels like there are challenges right now, but it feels like we'd like to think of it as like growing pains.
Because I think some of the earliest ones in Asia, I think was in Japan. Maybe about 95, 96, and since then they've grown a lot. I think they're maybe 6th or 7th biggest craft beer producer in the world. We are super late to the party. Commercially, counting all the breweries, all of us have been running maybe 3 years, full throttle, 3-4 years. So we have a long way to go.
Okay, Rafi, Kiyo, thank you very much for coming to Rappler.
Thank you.
Thank you.